A will reading turns into a war. When billionaire Arthur Hayes died, his grieving widow Eleanor was left at the mercy of her cruel mother-in-law Margaret. In a final act of spite, Margaret gathered the family to announce she was giving the entire Hayes fortune to her favorite son, Johnny, leaving Eleanor with nothing but eviction papers. But just as the champagne was poured, the doorbell rang. A lawyer Eleanor had never seen before walked in holding a single sealed briefcase. He wasn't there for Margaret's will. He was there for Arthur's, and the family was about to learn that the dead can still speak. The silence in the grand dining room of Greystone Manor was heavier than the antique oak table that dominated it. It was a suffocating silence, broken only by the sharp clink of Margaret Hayes's diamond ring against her porcelain teacup. Eleanor Hayes sat opposite her mother-in-law, her black mourning dress a stark contrast to the room's oppressive beige. It had been 3 days since her husband Arthur was buried. 3 days since the light of her life had been extinguished by a cruel, relentless illness. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on her chest until she felt she might shatter. But grief was a luxury Margaret Hayes did not permit. "You're still here, I see," Margaret said, her voice as thin and cold as a razor. She didn't look at Eleanor, instead inspecting a microscopic speck of dust on her silverware. Eleanor flinched. This was my home. Arthur's home." "It was my son's home," Margaret corrected, finally lifting her icy blue eyes. "And I am the matriarch of this family. The estate naturally reverts to me." Beside Margaret, Johnny Hayes. Arthur's younger brother let out a bored sigh and polished his gold watch on his sleeve. "It's just logistics, Eleanor. Don't get emotional." Johnny was everything Arthur was not: slick, shallow, and possessing an arrogance that seemed to radiate from his expensive cologne. He had always looked at Eleanor with a mixture of disdain and a predatory hunger that made her skin crawl. While Arthur was building the company, Johnny was building his playboy reputation, funded entirely by the family trust. "Arthur would have wanted me to be looked after," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. She hated how weak she sounded. Margaret let out a dry, rattling laugh. "What Arthur wanted was to defy his family by marrying, well, you," she gestured at Eleanor. "A woman with no name, no money. A glorified nursemaid who latched onto him when he was already sick." A spark of fire cut through Eleanor's grief. "I loved him. I was with him for 8 years before his diagnosis. I loved him when he was strong, and I loved him when he was weak." "A convenient story," Johnny smirked, taking a grape from the fruit bowl. The timing was impeccable. This was the hell she had endured for a decade. When she met Arthur Hayes at a university fundraiser, he was charming, brilliant, and kind. He was the CEO of Hayes Manufacturing, a titan of industry, but he spoke to her with a genuine interest that disarmed her. Their love was fast and deep, but Margaret's disapproval was just as fast. She had wanted Arthur to marry into another dynasty, to merge fortunes. Eleanor, an orphan who had put herself through college on scholarships, was an insult. For 10 years, Eleanor had weathered the quiet snubs, the passive-aggressive insults, and the outright accusations. She did it for Arthur. He saw his family's flaws, but he was a man of duty, and he loved his mother despite her venom. "Be patient with her, Ellie," he would murmur late at night. "Her heart is just closed. But she's my mother." Then the illness came. For 2 years, Eleanor had been his rock. She managed his care, held his hand through agonizing treatments, and slept on a cot in his hospital room. Margaret would visit for 10 minutes, complain about the lighting and leave. Johnny only showed up when he needed Arthur to co-sign a loan. Now Arthur was gone, and Eleanor was left alone with the wolves. "We will be finalizing Arthur's affairs tomorrow morning," Margaret announced, standing up, the signal that the audience was over. "Johnny and I will be in the study at 10 a.m. to discuss the distribution of assets. You may be present. I suppose it's only proper you hear it directly." "Distribution of assets?" Eleanor asked, confused. "Won't there be a formal reading from Arthur's lawyer?" Johnny chuckled. "Mother is the sole beneficiary of Arthur's personal will. It all comes to her, and she in turn will pass it to me as the new head of the family. It's all very clean. The lawyers just stamp the papers." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Sole beneficiary. Arthur had promised. He had promised he would always protect her. He told me he had a will, a specific one. He told me Mr. Henderson, his lawyer, had it. "Mr. Henderson retired 2 years ago, dear," Margaret said with a sickeningly sweet smile. "He was addled." Arthur signed a new, simplified will shortly after his diagnosis, naming me as his executrix and heir. He knew he was unwell. He knew he needed his mother to manage things. Eleanor's mind reeled. A new will signed after his diagnosis. When he was weak, medicated. "He wouldn't do that," she whispered, shaking her head. "He wouldn't." "He did," Margaret said, her voice final. 10 a.m., Eleanor, and I suggest you use the afternoon to begin packing your things. The guest cottage is unavailable." Eleanor watched them leave Johnny, patting his mother's back, the two of them a united, monstrous front. She sank back into her chair, the vast, empty room pressing in on her. It wasn't the money. It was the erasure. They were trying to erase her, to erase the last 10 years, to pretend her love for Arthur and his for her had never existed. She felt a hand on her shoulder and jumped. It was Mrs. Davies, the family's long-time housekeeper, her face etched with a rare, open pity. "Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, pressing a small, folded piece of paper into Eleanor's hand. "Mr. Arthur, he was a good man. He was worried. He gave this to me a month ago. He said to give it to you if the wolves started circling." Eleanor's heart hammered. She unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a business card. Gideon Blackwood. Blackwood and Associates, Estate Law and Fiduciary Services. "I don't understand," Eleanor said. "Mr. Arthur said, 'She won't know who he is, but he will know who she is.'" Mrs. Davies quoted, her eyes fearful but resolved. "He said, 'He has the real storm.'" Eleanor clutched the card. She didn't know what it meant, but it was the first flicker of hope in a sea of darkness. Arthur hadn't forgotten her. He had a plan. The study at Greystone Manor was Arthur's sanctuary. It was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled not just with leather-bound classics, but with texts on engineering, metallurgy, and modern business. His desk, a massive piece of mahogany, still had his favorite pen lying neatly on the blotter. This was the room where Margaret Hayes chose to execute her final crushing blow. Eleanor entered at 10 a.m. on the dot, clutching the business card for Gideon Blackwood in her pocket. She had tried calling the number all morning, but it went to a discreet voicemail. She hadn't left a message. What would she even say? Margaret and Johnny were already seated, a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket beside them. "Ah, Eleanor." "Punctual," Margaret said, as if commenting on a servant. "Do sit." "No, not there." She gestured to a small, hard-backed chair in the corner, far from the desk, while she and Johnny occupied the plush leather armchairs. Eleanor sat her spine rigid. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Let's not drag this out," Johnny said, checking his watch again. "I have a lunch meeting at the Barclay." "Of course, dear," Margaret said. She opened a leather portfolio on the desk. "As I informed you, Arthur's last will and testament, certified and signed, leaves his entire personal estate, including his shares in Heir's manufacturing, to me. As his mother and the closest surviving blood relative besides Johnny, it is my right and my duty to take control." She slid a document across the desk. It looked official. It had Arthur's signature at the bottom, a slightly shaky, weakened version of his bold script. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Had they forced him as the new owner of the Heir's estate? Margaret continued, her voice dripping with magnanimity. "I have decided to honor what I believe Arthur would have wanted free from undue influence." She steepled her fingers. "To my son, Johnny Heir, who has stood by me and shown such a keen interest in the family business, I bequeath controlling interest and chairmanship of Heir's manufacturing, this house, and the entirety of the Heir's portfolio. I know he will guide the legacy his father and brother built." Johnny beamed, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. He looked like a king who had just ascended the throne. He raised an imaginary glass to his mother. "And to you, Eleanor." Margaret's gaze hardened. She reached into the portfolio and pulled out a single check. She slid it across the vast desk, where it stopped embarrassingly far from Eleanor's reach. "Arthur would not have wanted you to be destitute. He was too soft-hearted. I have arranged a one-time severance, a final payment for your services to my son over the last few years. I think you'll find $25,000 is more than generous." Eleanor stared at the check. $25,000. It was less than Margaret spent on the catering for her last garden party. It was a slap in the face. It was an insult to a decade of her life, to a marriage built on genuine love and partnership. Services. Eleanor's voice was dangerously quiet. "Of course," Margaret said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You were his companion. It's only fair. Now, in exchange for this generosity, you will sign a full non-disclosure agreement regarding the Heir family, and vacate this house by 5 p.m. today. My lawyers have the paperwork ready." "You're evicting me," Eleanor stated, the numbness turning to a cold, hard rage. "It's not your home, dear," Johnny chimed in, finally standing. He walked over to the champagne bottle, his back to her. "It's my home now, and frankly your moping is dragging down the decor." He began to twist the wire on the cork. "He loved me," Eleanor said, her voice shaking, but gaining strength. "None of this. The house, the money. None of it matters. But he loved me, and you both hated him for it." He was confused. Margaret spat her mask of civility, dropping. "He was sick, and you were a vulture at his bedside, whispering poison in his ear. You thought you'd get it all, didn't you? You thought you'd steal my family's legacy. But blood is thicker than water, my dear. Blood always wins." "Indeed it does," Johnny said, aiming the bottle. "You won't get away with this," Eleanor whispered, standing up. "I don't know how, but you won't. Arthur was smarter than both of you. He was a better man than either of you could ever dream of being." "Is that so?" Johnny laughed. "Well, this better man left you with nothing but a cheap check." Pop! The cork shot out of the bottle, hitting the ceiling with a loud, celebratory thwack. Johnny began to pour the bubbling liquid into 2 flutes. "A toast, Mother," Johnny said, handing her a glass. "To the family. And to the future." "To the future," Margaret agreed, raising her glass. They both drank, their eyes on Eleanor, daring her to break. Eleanor looked from the insulting check to the smug, triumphant faces of the 2 people who had made her life and Arthur's a misery. She saw the shaky signature on the will. She thought of the business card in her pocket. He said, "He has the real storm." A strange, sudden calm settled over her. She turned without a word and walked out of the study, leaving the $25,000 check on the desk. "That's right, run away," Johnny called after her. "Don't forget to be out by 5. Eleanor walked down the long, marbled hallway. She didn't run. She walked with purpose. She was halfway to the front door when the chime rang. It was a deep, resonant sound, not the quick peal of a delivery. Mrs. Davies, who had been hovering nervously in the foyer, scurried to the door. Eleanor paused, her hand on the newel post. Mrs. Davies opened the massive oak door. Standing on the threshold was a man who seemed to suck all the light out of the foyer. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that was severe, not fashionable. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and intelligent, assessing eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a heavy, old-fashioned leather briefcase. "May I help you, sir?" Mrs. Davies asked. "My name is Gideon Blackwood," the man said, his voice a deep, quiet baritone that carried effortlessly through the hall. "I have an 11 a.m. appointment. I am here to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Hayes." The sound of Gideon Blackwood's voice echoed in the cavernous foyer. Eleanor's heart stopped, then restarted with a painful jolt. She turned her hand, gripping the newel post so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He will know who she is." From the study, Johnny's voice boomed. "Mother! Who is it? Tell them to come back later. We're celebrating." Johnny and Margaret appeared at the end of the hall, champagne flutes still in hand. When they saw the man at the door, their celebratory expressions curdled. "Who are you?" Margaret demanded, her tone clipped. "This is a private residence. We are in mourning." Mr. Blackwood stepped across the threshold. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that was immediately intimidating. He set his briefcase down on the marble floor with a soft, definitive thud. "My name is Gideon Blackwood of Blackwood and Associates," he repeated calmly as if she hadn't spoken. "I am the legal executor of the estate of Mr. Arthur Hayes. I am here for the official reading of his will." Johnny scoffed, striding forward. "You're a little late to the party, pal. The estate's been handled. Mother's the executor. It's done." Mr. Blackwood turned his piercing gaze on Johnny. He did not seem impressed. "You must be Johnny Hayes, and you—" He looked at Margaret. "Must be Mrs. Margaret Hayes." "I am," Margaret said, lifting her chin. "And as Johnny said, your services are not required. We have a certified will signed by my son, naming me as executor. Everything has been distributed." "Distributed?" Blackwood's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. "That is premature." He then looked past them, his eyes landing on Eleanor. For a moment, his severe expression softened by a minuscule, almost imperceptible degree. "And you are Miss Eleanor Hayes, Arthur's wife?" "I am," Eleanor said, finding her voice. "Good," Blackwood said, nodding. "Then we are all here. We shall proceed." He bent to pick up his briefcase. "You will do no such thing. Margaret shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "You are trespassing. I am ordering you to leave my house. With respect, Mrs. Hayes," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "The ownership of this house is one of the primary matters to be settled by the will I am executing. Until that is done, you are not in a position to order anyone to leave." He turned to Mrs. Davies. "Would you be so kind as to show us to the study?" "Right this way, sir," Mrs. Davies said, looking almost gleeful. Blackwood began to walk down the hall. "Stop." Johnny moved to block his path. "I don't know what kind of scam you're pulling, but I'm the new head of Hayes Manufacturing, and I'll have you disbarred. We have the real will." Blackwood stopped, turning to face Johnny fully. He was a few inches taller, and where Johnny was soft from a life of leisure, Blackwood looked like he was carved from stone. "What you have, Mr. Hayes," Blackwood said, "is a will signed by Arthur Hayes on April the 12th, correct?" Margaret and Johnny exchanged a shocked look. "How did you—" Margaret began. "It was a document I advised him to create," Blackwood said. "It was a decoy, designed for one purpose: to keep you both sated and to prevent you from pressuring a dying man, should you become suspicious." Eleanor gasped. "A decoy? Arthur, you magnificent man." That's absurd," Johnny sputtered. "It's notarized, it's legal." "Oh, it's quite legal," Blackwood agreed smoothly. "It legally bequeaths his personal effects, his watch collection, his books, his clothing, a portfolio of which I'm sure Mrs. Hayes is the proud new owner. However, it has no bearing, none whatsoever, on Hayes Manufacturing, this property, or the primary family trust. Those assets were not his to give in that document." "What are you talking about?" Margaret's face was turning a blotchy red. "He inherited everything from his father." "Incorrect," Blackwood said. "He inherited control of the company, but it was held in a complex trust, a trust that he was the sole arbiter of. This decoy will you hold is superseded by a second, far more comprehensive testamentary document. The true will. A will Mr. Hayes signed in my office just 8 weeks ago, with 2 independent witnesses and a full psychiatric evaluation to confirm his soundness of mind. He was, as he put it, preparing for the wolves." Blackwood looked pointedly at Johnny and Margaret. "Now," he said, "we will go to the study, or I can have you both removed for interfering with the lawful execution of a billionaire's estate. The choice is yours." Johnny looked ready to throw a punch, but Margaret, for the first time, looked afraid. She knew the law. She knew when she was beaten. "Fine," she hissed. "Read your little paper. It will say the same thing. Arthur loved me. He would never leave his family's legacy to an outsider." "We shall see," Mr. Blackwood said. He swept past them. Eleanor, her legs shaking, followed him. Mrs. Davies opened the study doors, and Blackwood walked to the head of the mahogany desk. He placed his briefcase on it and clicked open the 2 brass latches. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Margaret and Johnny stalked in after him, their faces masks of thunder. They took the leather armchairs again, trying to reclaim their power. Mr. Blackwood did not sit. He stood a figure of absolute authority. He looked at Eleanor, who was still hovering by the door. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "please, sit." He gestured not to the small, hard chair in the corner, but to the high-backed, ornate leather chair behind the desk. Arthur's chair. Eleanor's breath hitched. Slowly she walked around the desk and sat down. It felt right. "Right," Blackwood said, pulling a thick, cream-colored, ribbon-bound document from his case. "Let us begin." Mr. Gideon Blackwood put on his glasses and unfurled the document. The air in the room was so thick with tension, Eleanor felt she could barely breathe. Johnny was tapping his foot at a frantic pace, and Margaret was sitting as still as a statue, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in her lap. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur Elias Hayes." Blackwood began, his voice formal and resonant. "Executed on September 14th of this year. All previous wills and codicils are hereby revoked." He looked up over his glasses. "That includes the document dated April 12th, which Mrs. Margaret Hayes currently holds. This document expressly revokes it." "Get on with it," Johnny snapped. "As you wish," Blackwood said. "I will skip the standard legal preamble and move to the bequests." He cleared his throat. "First, to several long-time employees of Hayes Manufacturing and the Greystone Manor household staff. To Mrs. Davies, for her years of loyal service and discretion, I bequeath the sum of £200,000 tax-free from the trust to ensure her comfortable retirement." Eleanor glanced at Mrs. Davies, who was standing by the door, and put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with tears. "To my mother, Margaret Hayes." Margaret sat bolt upright, her eyes gleaming with a greedy, desperate victory. "I bequeath a lifetime stipend of £5,000 per month, the same amount my father allocated to her, to continue for the rest of her natural life." The colour drained from Margaret's face. "5,000, that's my current allowance. That's nothing." "It is what Arthur's father deemed appropriate," Blackwood said coolly. "And it is what Arthur chose to continue. He also bequeaths to you the lifetime right to live in this house, Greystone Manor." Margaret let out a shaky breath of relief. "On the sole condition that the new owner of the property permits it." "New owner," Margaret and Johnny said in unison. Blackwood ignored them. "To my brother Johnny Hayes." Johnny leaned forward, his smugness returning. "Here we go. The main event. I bequeath the sum of $500,000 to be paid from the estate. This sum is sufficient in my estimation for a man of his faculties to make a fresh start of his own, free from the burdens of a legacy he has never shown an interest in protecting." The room went utterly silent. Johnny's face went from smug to confused to finally a deep apoplectic purple. $500,000, oh, he whispered, his voice cracking. That's a tip. The company is worth billions." "He's joking. It's a joke." "I assure you Mr. Hayes was not joking," Blackwood said. "He also added a specific clause. Should my brother Johnny Hayes or my mother Margaret Hayes choose to formally contest this will in a court of law, their aforementioned bequests shall be immediately nullified, and they shall receive precisely nothing." It was a perfect trap. He gave them just enough to make them afraid to lose it, but not nearly enough to satisfy them. This is insane." Johnny was on his feet now. He was sick. He was manipulated. She... He pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. "She did this. The will is fraudulent." The will was certified by 3 separate parties. "Mr. Hayes, contesting it would be unwise," Blackwood advised. "Now please sit. We are not finished." "What's left?" Margaret hissed, her face a mask of pure hatred. "Who gets it? Who gets my company? A charity that nurse he was obsessed with." Blackwood took a breath. "We now come to the final bequest. The residuary estate. This includes the entirety of Arthur Hayes's controlling interest in Hayes Manufacturing, all associated stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, the property of Greystone Manor and all its contents, the apartment in Paris, the house in Lake Como, and the remainder of the Hayes family trust. Everything. He paused, letting the weight of the words fill the room. All of it, Humo. He read. I leave with my whole heart, my absolute trust, and my undying love to my wife Eleanor Catherine Hayes. Eleanor's world tilted. A ringing sound filled her ears. She gripped the arms of Arthur's chair as the room spun. All of it, no! Margaret's scream was primal. It wasn't a word. It was a sound of pure, undiluted rage. She launched herself out of the chair, her hands clawed, aiming for Eleanor. You harlot! You thief! You killed him, and you stole it! Before she could take 2 steps, Mr. Blackwood simply moved between them. He didn't touch her, but his sheer presence was a wall. Mrs. Hayes, I will have you removed, he said, his voice lethal. Johnny, meanwhile, was frozen, his mouth open, his face slack with disbelief. The reality of his disinheritance was crashing down on him. Majority shareholder, Eleanor whispered, staring at Blackwood. CEO, you are the new owner of Hayes Manufacturing, Mrs. Hayes, Blackwood confirmed. Effective immediately. My firm and I are, of course, at your disposal to help manage the transition. This is a forgery, Johnny finally roared, finding his voice. I will spend every last cent of that $500,000 to see her in prison. Mother, call our lawyer, call Robert Sullivan. I would not advise that, Blackwood said, reaching into his briefcase again. Arthur anticipated your reaction. He left a second document, a personal letter, to be read aloud in the event of any dispute. I will not listen to any more of your lies, Margaret shrieked. You will, Blackwood said, because this letter is not part of the will. It is a separate declaration, and copies have already been delivered to the other members of the board of directors at Hayes Manufacturing and my partners. It will be heard. He pulled out a simple handwritten envelope. On the front, in Arthur's strong, clear script, it said, to be read when they show their true colors. Blackwood opened it. This, Eleanor knew, was the real storm. Gideon Blackwood unfolded the letter. It was written on Arthur's personal stationery. Even from across the desk, Eleanor could see the familiar, bold strokes of his fountain pen. This was written when he was still strong. My dearest Ellie. Blackwood began, his voice softening for the first time. If you are hearing this, it means I am gone, and my mother and brother are behaving exactly as I feared they would. Please know, my love, that this grand gesture is not a burden. It is my trust. It is my heart. I am not giving you this company. I am returning it to the only person who shares my values. Eleanor pressed her hands to her mouth, tears finally overwhelming her. Blackwood continued reading Arthur's words, his voice now turning hard as he addressed the others. To my mother and my brother. You have spent the last decade trying to poison me against the best thing that ever happened to me. You have accused Eleanor of being a gold digger. You, Margaret, who have not worked a day in your life and live entirely off the legacy of a man you drove to an early grave with your social climbing and cold ambition. You, Johnny, who have treated the family company as your personal piggy bank, a reputation I have spent my entire career cleaning up. Johnny's face went white. What is he talking about? He's talking about the $1.2 million I diverted from the executive fund to pay your gambling debts in Macau. Blackwood read his eyes fixed on Johnny. He's talking about the failed tech startup you launched, which was a front to siphon $3 million, which I then had to replace from my own accounts to avoid a shareholder panic. He's talking about the settlement I paid to a young intern in the marketing department, the one you assaulted at the Christmas party to prevent a scandal that would have destroyed us. Margaret gasped, looking at Johnny in genuine shock. Johnny, you told me she fell. Shut up, Mother, Johnny hissed. Arthur's letter was relentless. You, Johnny, are a leech. You are weak and you are cruel. To give you control of Heir's manufacturing would be to light the match on my life's work. The 500,000 is more than you deserve. It is a final act of pity for the brother I wished I had. Blackwood paused. Johnny had sunk into his chair, his face buried in his hands. He was utterly broken. And to you, Mother, Blackwood read on. Margaret flinched as if struck. You taught me everything about business, but nothing about love. You saw my marriage to Eleanor not as a joy, but as a merger you failed to broker. You saw my illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to regain control. You hounded me. You whispered to me that my wife was cheating, that she was stealing, that she was praying for my death. You brought that decoy will to my hospital bed, telling me it was just a formality to protect the family from her. Eleanor felt sick. She'd had no idea. I signed it. Arthur's letter continued. Because I was tired. And because I knew it would make you stop. I knew it would keep you fat and happy and blind long enough for my real will to be secured. Your cruelty, Mother, is your great weakness. You believe everyone is as transactional as you are, but you misjudged me, and you fatally misjudged my wife. The stipend is all you get. You will live on her charity in her house. You will, for the rest of your life, be reminded daily that the woman you tried to destroy is the one who holds your fate in her hands. That I find is a justice my father would have appreciated. The letter was finished. Blackwood folded it slowly. He knew. Eleanor whispered, tears of grief and profound, aching love streaming down her face. He saw it all. He did, Blackwood said gently. He was protecting you, and he was protecting his legacy. Margaret Hayes was no longer screaming. She was sitting in her chair, her face a terrifying, vacant mask. She was a woman who had built her entire identity on power, power over her husband, her children, and her social circle. In the span of 10 minutes, it had all been systematically dismantled. Johnny was a wreck sobbing into his hands, not tears of grief, but tears of a spoiled child who had just had his favorite toy and his entire future taken away. Now, Mr. Blackwood said, his voice all business again as he turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes, we have much to discuss. The board has been notified of the transition. An emergency meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. They are anxious. Johnny and Margaret have spent the last 3 days telling everyone they were taking over. We have a significant amount of damage control to do. Eleanor looked at the letter. She looked at the wreckage of her in-laws. She looked at the chair she was sitting in. The grief was still there, a hollow ache. But it was no longer the only thing. A new feeling was mixing with it, a cold, clear resolve. Arthur hadn't just left her a fortune. He had left her a mission. Damage control. Eleanor said, her voice shaky but firm. She wiped her tears, sitting up straighter in Arthur's chair. Johnny, get out. Johnny's head snapped up. What? What did you say to me? I said, get out. Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. You have $500,000. You are no longer an employee of this company, and you are no longer a resident of this house. Take your champagne and go." "You can't." "I can," Eleanor said. "Mr. Blackwood, please have security escort him from the premises." "With pleasure," Blackwood said, touching his phone. "And you," Eleanor said, turning to the silent, seething Margaret. "You may stay. For now. You will live in the guest wing. You will not speak to me. You will not interfere with the company. And you will not contact the board. The moment you do, you will be removed. You will live on my charity, just as Arthur intended. Those are my terms." Margaret just stared at her, her eyes vibrating with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. Two large men in dark suits entered the study. "Mr. Johnny Hayes," Blackwood instructed, "these gentlemen will show you to the door." Johnny, realizing it was over, flew into a final, pathetic rage. "You'll regret this, both of you. This isn't over. I'll ruin you. I'll ruin the company." He was dragged, shouting and kicking from the study. When the sound of his tantrum faded, the house fell silent again. But this time it was a different kind of silence. It was clean. "Mrs. Hayes," Blackwood said, "are you ready to get to work?" Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath. "Yes. Yes, I am. Call the board. Tell them I'll be there. Arthur's legacy is safe with me." The 3 months that followed were a trial by fire. Eleanor learned very quickly that inheriting $1 billion company was not a victory. It was the start of a war. The board of directors at Hayes Manufacturing was comprised of old-world industry men. They had respected Arthur, but they looked at Eleanor as a temporary inconvenience. They were polite, of course, but their condescension was palpable. They called her Mrs. Hayes, with a tone that implied little lady. They assumed she would be a figurehead, that she would appoint a seasoned male CEO from their ranks and retreat to her mansion to grieve. They too misjudged her. Eleanor, with Gideon Blackwood as her permanent legal counsel, did not retreat. She moved into the CEO's office. She spent 18-hour days poring over every file, every financial report, every R&D project. She had spent a decade listening to Arthur talk about his work, his passions, his frustrations, his plans. She knew the company better than any of them realized. But there was a poison in the well. Johnny, though barred from the premises, was not idle. He used his $500,000 as a war chest, launching a vicious public smear campaign. He gave exclusive, tear-filled interviews to tabloid reporters, painting Eleanor as a black widow who had manipulated his sick, dying brother into signing away the family fortune. He fed them stories, all lies about her affairs, her lavish spending, which was non-existent, and her cruel treatment of his grieving elderly mother. Margaret, for her part, played the role of the tragic victim perfectly. She was a silent, black-clad figure living in the guest wing of her own home, a prisoner of her tyrannical daughter-in-law. She secretly met with the minority shareholders, whispering that Eleanor was unstable, inexperienced, and driving the company into the ground. Share prices began to wobble. The board grew more anxious. "They're planning a vote of no confidence," Gideon Blackwood told her one late night in the boardroom as they shared a container of cold takeout. "The quarterly report is next week. They're going to use the dip in stock, a dip they helped create by spreading rumors to oust you and install their own man, Robert Brown, as interim CEO. "They can't," Eleanor said, rubbing her temples. "My shares give me 51% control." "They can't oust you as owner," Gideon corrected. but they can vote to remove you as chairwoman and CEO. They can claim you are unfit to lead a danger to the company's financial health. If they do that, they can essentially freeze you out, relegate you to a silent partner while they run your company into the ground. Arthur's letter, the one about Johnny's embezzlement, is not provable without a deep audit, which they are blocking, Gideon said. They claim it was the ravings of a sick man, that you wrote the letter. Right now, it's your word against the narrative Johnny is painting. We need a smoking gun. Then I'll find one, Eleanor said. For the next week, she didn't go home. She slept on the sofa in her office. She, Gideon, and a small, trusted team of forensic accountants that Blackwood hired from an outside firm bypassed the board entirely. They dug into the company's servers, pulling financials from the last 5 years. They worked backwards from the failed tech startup Arthur had mentioned in his letter. At 3:00 a.m., on the day before the shareholder meeting, Eleanor found it. "Gideon," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Look at this." It wasn't just a simple siphoning of $3 million. It was a complex web of shell corporations. Johnny wasn't just stealing, he was laundering. He had set up fake suppliers, invoiced Heir Manufacturing for non-existent rare earth metals, and then funneled the payments through 3 different offshore accounts. He was stealing the company blind, Eleanor breathed. "It's worse than that," Gideon said, following the trail on his own laptop. "This main shell corporation, JM Capital, it's still active. He's still being paid." "But how?" Eleanor said. "His access was cut." Gideon pointed to a name on the authorization logs. "He's not authorizing it. Someone else is." The name was Margaret Hayes. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. It all clicked. Margaret wasn't just a co-conspirator in the cover-up. She was an active participant. Johnny was the greedy, reckless one, but Margaret was the smart, cold, calculating one. She had been helping her favored son bleed the company dry for years. Arthur must have found out, which is what led to the new will. But he died before he could root out the full extent of the cancer. They had been partners, stealing from their own family. "This," Gideon said, a grim satisfaction on his face, "is not a smoking gun. This is a nuclear bomb. The shareholders' meeting is at 10 a.m. This changes the entire agenda." Eleanor looked at the spreadsheet at the proof of betrayal. She thought of Arthur working himself to the bone, trying to build a legacy while his own mother and brother were tearing it apart from the inside. "Get me Robert Brown on the phone," Eleanor said. "The interim CEO candidate. Wake him up, and get me the SEC, and then call the police." The boardroom at Heir Manufacturing was a cathedral of glass and steel, perched 40 stories above the city. It was designed to intimidate, and today it served its purpose. The long, reflective black granite table was filled. The board of directors, the major minority shareholders, and a phalanx of sharp-suited lawyers. They were all there. They were the old guard men who had been in this room for decades, and at the head of the table in the chairman's seat sat Eleanor. She was an island, a solitary figure in a dark grey suit that mirrored the storm clouds outside. To her right, impassive and silent, sat Gideon Blackwood, his hands resting on his own identical unblemished briefcase. At the far end, flanked by his own lawyers, sat Johnny Hayes. He was not subdued. He was preening. He had spent the last week calling in favors, spreading poison and painting himself as the company's savior. He leaned back in his chair, a smug, confident smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had the votes. He believed the war was already won. Robert Brown, the silver-haired director Johnny had tapped to be his interim CEO, stood up to begin the meeting. "We are here today," Brown began, his voice smooth and practiced, "to discuss a grave matter, the stability and future leadership of Heir's manufacturing. Since the tragic and, I must say, unsettling passing of Arthur Hayes, our stock has seen a 15% drop. The market is nervous. The market, ladies and gentlemen, requires a steady hand. Someone with a deep generational understanding of this company." He gave a sympathetic, patronizing glance toward Eleanor. No disrespect intended to Mrs. Hayes, whose grief we all profoundly understand. But this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a parlor room. We need leadership, not sentiment. A murmur of agreement rippled around the table. Johnny decided it was his moment. He stood up, placing his palms on the table. "My friends, my colleagues, Robert is right. What we have here is a crisis. My father and my brother, God rest his soul, built an empire. And in 3 short months we are watching it wobble. Why? Because it is being run by a housewife." Another louder murmur. "She has no experience." Johnny's voice rose, filled with false passion. "She's emotional. She's locked out my grieving, elderly mother. She has no idea how to run a company of this magnitude, and she is running my family's legacy into the ground. We are here to vote, to save this company, to save ourselves. I move for a vote of no confidence. Let's end this farce, and get back to business." Johnny sat down to a round of quiet hears. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes glittering with triumph. "It's over." A single sharp sound cut through the room. Ting. Eleanor had tapped her pen gently against her water glass. The room fell silent. She waited a beat, then slowly, deliberately, she stood. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Johnny, for your passionate assessment." Her voice was not loud, but it was so cold and clear it seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "You are all here for a vote of no confidence. You're concerned about a 15% stock drop. You're concerned about stability." She began to walk her heels, clicking softly on the marble, moving from the head of the table to stand before the large presentation screen. "You're right to be concerned," she said, "but you have fatally misdiagnosed the disease. You believe I am the instability. You believe I am the weakness in the system." She turned her gaze on Johnny. "The truth is, I am the cure. The disease that has been sitting at this table in this family for years." Johnny's smirk wavered. "What is this more emotional theatrics?" "Gideon," Eleanor said. Gideon Blackwood stood. "Before any vote is taken," he announced, his baritone cutting through the tension, "you must all be made aware that a criminal complaint backed by a full forensic audit was filed with the District Attorney's Office and the SEC at 6:05 a.m. this morning." The room went utterly still. Gasps, whispers. Johnny's face went from smug to confused. "You're worried about a 15% stock drop," Eleanor continued. "I'm worried about $40 million. She pressed a button. The giant screen lit up. "For the last 6 years, Eleanor said, Heir's Manufacturing has been paying astronomical sums to a rare earth metals supplier based in Cyprus. The problem is, the supplier doesn't exist." The screen changed. A complex web of shell corporations. All of those payments, millions of dollars every quarter, have been funneled through this web, all leading to one parent entity, a company called JM Capital. She let the name hang in the air. JM. I was puzzled by the name at first. Who could JM be? Her eyes locked onto Johnny. "Johnny, Any ideas? Johnny shot to his feet. This is slander. It's fabricated. You faked this. This is a joke. A joke, Eleanor said. We traced the authorization codes, Johnny. For 5 years, they came from your executive terminal. You have been systematically bleeding this company dry. The boardroom erupted. Order. Brown yelled, banging a gavel. It was Arthur. Johnny sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. He knew it was a discretionary fund. He approved every payment. Ask him. A bold claim, Eleanor said, to blame a dead man, and a fascinating one, because you see the payments didn't stop when Arthur died. They didn't even stop 3 months ago, when your access to all company accounts was revoked. She paused, letting the implication sink in. So who, she asked the silent, horrified room, has been authorizing millions in fraudulent payments for the last 3 months? She clicked the slide. An IP address. This IP address. Our tech team traced it. It's not from this building. It's from Greystone Manor. The guest wing, to be precise. She looked at Johnny, her expression one of cold pity. The J is for Johnny, and the M is for Margaret. You bitch, Johnny roared, finally understanding. A bitch who does her homework, Eleanor countered, because where did that $40 million go? It wasn't just sitting in an account. You were moving it, preparing for a new life, preparing to flee after you and your mother looted the company and let it burn. She clicked to the final slide. It was a photograph of a stunning glass-walled penthouse overlooking a turquoise sea. The Al Fatan Tower, Dubai, Eleanor announced. A $4.5 million cash purchase finalized 2 days ago. In your name, Johnny. It was over. Johnny knew it. The board knew it. He looked at the door. He was trapped. At that exact second, the heavy boardroom doors were flung open, crashing against the walls. "Don't move," a voice boomed. 2 detectives in suits, flanked by 4 uniformed officers, flooded the room. The board members screamed. "Johnny Hayes," one detective barked. Johnny was a cornered animal. "You can't. I am a Hayes." "You are under arrest," the detective said, moving forward for conspiracy wire fraud and embezzlement. Seeing his entire life, the money, the power, the Dubai penthouse evaporate, Johnny snapped. All his arrogance, all his slick charm vanished, replaced by a primal, pathetic rage. "You!" he roared. "You did this!" He lunged, not at the police but at Eleanor. He grabbed the heavy glass water pitcher from the table and raised it high, intent on smashing it over her head. He never made it. Gideon Blackwood, who had been standing silent, moved with a speed that defied his quiet, lawyerly appearance. He didn't just block the blow. He pivoted, seizing Johnny's wrist, using his own forward momentum against him, and drove him face first down onto the black granite table. The crack of Johnny's nose breaking, followed by the shattering of the pitcher, was sickeningly loud. Johnny howled a wet, agonizing sound, blood pouring from his face onto the scattered stock reports. "Get off me. Get off me. You don't know who I am." The police swarmed, yanking his arms behind his back, cuffing him as he sobbed and bled. "It wasn't just me," he screamed, his voice muffled by the table. "It was her. She made me. She planned it all. Mother, tell them she's the smart one. She's the one you want." He pointed a bloody, cuffed hand toward the open doorway. And as if summoned, Margaret Hayes appeared. She wasn't in cuffs. Not yet. She was flanked by 2 other detectives, but she hadn't been arrested. She had been summoned by Johnny. He had told her to arrive at 11 a.m. for his victory celebration. She had walked right into the trap. She stopped dead on the threshold. Her eyes took in the scene, the shattered glass, the police, the terrified board, and finally her son, her golden boy, bloody, defeated, and in handcuffs being hauled to his feet. Her face, a perfect mask of aristocratic confidence, collapsed. Margaret Hayes, the detective at her side, said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." Margaret's head snapped toward Eleanor. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, so toxic, it was terrifying. It was the look of a queen who had been checkmated by a pawn. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stared, her entire world, her dynasty crumbling to dust at the hands of the nursemaid she had tried to destroy. Eleanor stood tall, watching as the mother and son were led away, Johnny still screaming and blaming everyone but himself. Margaret finally deathly silent, the silence of absolute, irreversible defeat. The room was a wreck. Water blood and shattered glass littered the floor. The board members were pale, stunned, and staring at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. Eleanor calmly walked back to the head of the table. She sat down in Arthur's chair. She folded her hands. "Well," she said, her voice echoing in the shocked silence, "it appears the position of interim CEO is no longer being contested." She looked directly at a trembling Robert Brown. "Robert, be a dear and find someone to clean this up." She straightened her suit jacket, not a speck of dust on her. "Now," Eleanor Hayes said, the new and undisputed head of the company, "as I was saying, shall we discuss the real quarterly projections? Justice in the end was not just served, it was delivered. Eleanor Hayes, armed with the truth and the trust her husband placed in her, not only saved his company, but she exposed the vipers he had called family. The story of Margaret and Johnny serves as a powerful reminder. Karma is not a myth. Greed and cruelty write checks that justice will always come to cash. What goes around comes around, and sometimes it brings handcuffs. What did you think of Eleanor's final move? Do you believe Margaret got what she deserved, or was Johnny the true villain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community great. If you were moved by this story of justice and vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the good guys can win, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas just like this one. Thank you for listening. It wasn't the lie that broke her. It was the applause. In the gilded world of Manhattan's elite, Everick and Alina Winscott were the ultimate power couple, a tech billionaire and his brilliant, beautiful, and very pregnant wife. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece. But when a single damning receipt appeared, the masterpiece began to crack. What followed was not just a quiet heartbreak, but a cold, calculated war. This is the story of how a woman pushed to the edge, refused to be a victim, and instead orchestrated a public spectacle so devastating it brought an entire empire to its knees. The penthouse at 15 Central Park West was less of a home and more of a statement. It was a silent testament to the dizzying success of Everick Winscott, a man who had wrestled the digital world into submission and emerged a billionaire before his 40th birthday. Every surface was polished marble or gleaming chrome. Every piece of art was a conversation starter, and every window offered a godlike view of the city he considered his kingdom. and in the heart of this kingdom was his queen Alina Winscott. At 34, Alina was more than just a beautiful accessory to Everett's wealth. With a degree in art history from Yale and a lineage that traced back to old New York money, she possessed a quiet intelligence and a steely grace that the city's fawning socialites could only imitate. Now 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son, they knew her body was changing, but her composure remained absolute. The pregnancy, however, had not been easy. It was classified as high risk, a delicate condition that had forced Alina to retreat from her position on the board of the Met and confined her to a life of quiet observation. It was in this forced stillness that she first began to notice the cracks. It started subtly. A scent on Everett's Tom Ford suit jacket when he came home late from a bored dinner. It wasn't the stale cigar smoke of his usual associates or the familiar, cloying perfumes of their wives. It was something younger, sweeter. Joe Malone's peony and blush suede. A scent Alina recognized from the gaggle of junior assistants at his company Winscott Innovations. She had dismissed it. A hug, a handshake, the proximity of a crowded elevator. Then came the late nights, more frequent than ever. The excuses were plausible, of course. A server farm crisis in Virginia, a hostile takeover bid from a competitor in Silicon Valley, a last-minute flight to London to soothe anxious investors. Everett was a man who moved the world, and the world was a demanding mistress. He would return at 3 a.m., smelling of expensive whiskey and exhaustion kissing her forehead, with lips that felt strangely disconnected from the man she knew. "Don't wait up for me, Elle." He'd murmur, his voice a low thrum of apology. "It's a beast right now. Just a few more weeks and I'm all yours. Ours." He'd place a hand on her swollen belly, a gesture that once thrilled her, but now felt like a performance. The first real, undeniable splinter of suspicion lodged itself in her heart on a Tuesday. Everett was supposedly in Chicago, closing a deal. Alina was struggling with insomnia, her mind a frantic carousel of baby names and birth plans. At 2:17 a.m., she padded into their cavernous walk-in closet to fetch an extra pillow. Everett's travel valet case, which was supposed to be with him, was sitting on his mahogany dresser. A careless oversight. A cold dread washed over her. Her hand trembled as she unzipped it. Inside, nestled among his neatly folded shirts, was the folio for their American Express black card. She never looked at the statements. Everett's business manager, a stern man named Mr. Abernathy, handled everything. But a single receipt had slipped out, lying face up. It wasn't for a steak dinner at Gibson's in Chicago, or a suite at the Peninsula. It was a charge from a boutique hotel in a part of Manhattan they never frequented Soho, the Serafina Hotel, for a junior suite. The charge was dated 2 weeks prior, on a night Everett was supposed to have been working late at his office, just a few blocks from their home. Alina sank onto a velvet ottoman, the receipt feeling like a shard of ice in her hand. It wasn't the money. It was the geography. The lie. The Serafina wasn't a place for business meetings. It was a place for secrets, with its discreet entrance and rooms designed for illicit romance. Her mind reeled back. 2 weeks ago. A Wednesday. He had come home smelling of rain and that same sweet perfume. He'd told her he'd been caught in a downpour after a meeting, ran late, forced to share a cab with his assistant. It had all sounded so reasonable then. Now it sounded like a script. She put the receipt back, zipped the case, and returned to bed. She lay there, her body rigid, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The baby kicked a sudden sharp reminder of the life they were supposed to be building together. For the first time, Alina Winscott felt a terrifying primal rage build within her. She was not a fool. She was not a woman to be placated with diamonds and empty gestures. She was a partner, a mother-to-be, and she would not have her life, her family dismantled by a cheap lie and a secret hotel room in Soho. Sleep was impossible. As the sun began to cast a grey dawn over the city, Alina made a decision. She would not cry. She would not scream. She would gather facts. She would become her own investigator. The art historian in her knew that to understand a masterpiece, you had to study every brushstroke, every layer of paint, every hidden detail. Her marriage, her life was her masterpiece, and she was about to uncover its forgery. The next morning, Alina moved with a chilling, newfound purpose. When Everick called from Chicago, his voice oozing with a practiced affection that now sounded grotesque to her, she was the perfect wife. She asked about the deal, feigned a sleepy yawn, and told him she loved him. Each word was a carefully chosen weapon, a piece of camouflage for the war she was now waging in secret. "Love you more, Elle. The jet's on the tarmac. I'll be home in time to kiss you goodnight," he'd said. "I'll be waiting," she replied, her voice as smooth as glass. After the call, her work began. She didn't start with his phone or computer. That was amateurish. Everick was a tech mogul. His digital security would be a fortress. She started with the one thing even he couldn't fully digitize: his ego. Her first stop was her laptop, not in their shared office, but in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, a place he associated with her reading gardening magazines. She began with the name of the hotel, the Serafina. She studied its website, its clientele, its press. It was exactly as she'd feared, a haven for the wealthy and discreet, known for its no-questions-asked policy. Then she moved on to the more complex task, the American Express account. Everick had given her a supplementary card, but she had never used the online portal. She knew his business manager, Abernathy, had primary access. Getting past him would be impossible. But what about the supplementary account? Her account. She went to the Amex website and clicked Forgot Password, entering her card details. The security question popped up. What is the name of your first pet? A wave of nostalgia, sharp and painful, hit her. It was a golden retriever named Winston. They had gotten together in the first year of their marriage. Everick had cried the day he died. The memory felt like a betrayal. She typed Winston, access granted. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the portal loaded. She clicked on Statements. There, in crisp PDF format, were the last 12 months of her supplementary card's activity, which was nothing. She never used it. But the portal gave her another option: View all account activity. She clicked it. A list of transactions appeared, both his and hers. Her breath hitched. She wasn't just looking at a statement. She was looking at the secret diary of her husband's life. She scrolled past the multi-thousand-dollar charges at Ethelred's for business dinners, the payments to NetJets, the endless stream of money that fueled their life. She was looking for anomalies. Small charges that would fly under the radar of a business manager looking for major fraud. A $200 charge at a florist in a neighborhood they never went to. Multiple charges for Ubers that didn't start or end at their home or his office. And then she found it. A recurring charge, once every 2 weeks for the last 4 months. A payment of $450 to a CJ Art Advisory. It was coded as professional services. It was just small enough to be an insignificant business expense, A consultation, perhaps, but it was the consistency that caught her eye. It was too regular. A quick Google search for CJ Art Advisory brought up a sleek, minimalist website. The founder, sole proprietor, and chief curator was a woman named Chloe Jensen. The About page featured a photograph of her. She was young, maybe 27, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a sweep of dark hair, and a confident smile. She was standing in front of a large, abstract canvas, looking every bit the ambitious, chic New Yorker. The website listed her gallery address. It was in Chelsea. Alina felt a cold certainty settle in her bones. This was her. This was the woman who wore peony and blush suede. But she needed more than a recurring payment. A business relationship, however unlikely, was still deniable. She needed to link Chloe Jensen to Everick personally, incontrovertibly. Her mind, trained to find patterns and connections in art, now applied that same skill to infidelity. She remembered a charity gala they had attended 5 months ago, the Art for Tomorrow benefit. Everick had been a major sponsor. She pulled up the event's webpage, scrolling through the photo gallery, and there he was, Everick smiling with his arm around a beaming Chloe Jensen. The caption read, "Event benefactor Everick Winscott, with gallery owner Chloe Jensen, who curated tonight's successful auction." In the photo, Chloe was looking at Everick with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. Everick, in turn, was looking at the camera, but his body was angled toward her, a subtle intimacy in their posture that Alina, in her blissful ignorance that night, had completely missed. The pieces were clicking into place. The meeting, the art advisory payments as a cover, the secret hotel stays. Alina's next step was bolder. She needed to see Chloe's life, her habits. Using a name she'd used for anonymous auction bidding in the past, Helena Vane, she created a new Instagram account. It was a ghost account, no profile picture, no followers. She searched for Chloe Jensen. Her profile was public. It was a gallery of a life lived for an audience. Chloe at gallery openings. Chloe sipping rosé at a rooftop bar in the meatpacking district. Chloe on a weekend trip to the Hamptons. Alina scrolled back through months of posts, her eyes scanning for any sign of Everick. He was too smart to appear in a photo, but his presence was there like a ghost. A photo of Chloe's wrist, adorned with a delicate gold bracelet. A Cartier Love bracelet. Alina felt a chill. She herself had the same one, a 3rd anniversary gift from Everick. Was it a coincidence, or was it a sick, twisted signature of his affection? Then she saw it. A post from 2 weeks ago. Chloe holding a coffee cup, sitting in a sunlit cafe. The caption read, "Soho mornings are my favorite, nat caffeine, hashed city life, hat inspiration." In the reflection of the large window behind her, barely visible. But there, if you knew what you were looking for, was the distinctive awning of the Serafina Hotel. And reflected in her sunglasses, a distorted but recognizable image of a man's silhouette. A man with Everick Winscott's broad shoulders and characteristic posture. Alina took a screenshot, zooming in until the pixels blurred. It was him. She closed the laptop, her body trembling not with weakness, but with a terrifying crystalline rage. The silent investigation was over. She had the who, the what, the where, the when. She had the proof, circumstantial but overwhelming. Now came the question of how. How to use this information. A quiet divorce, a screaming confrontation in their sterile penthouse. No. That was too simple. That would let them control the narrative, paint her as hysterical emotional, the spurned pregnant wife. She thought of Chloe Jensen's public Instagram, her curated life, her carefully constructed image as a rising star in the art world. An image Alina suspected that was funded by her husband. An image that was built on the foundations of her own broken trust. A plan began to form in Alina's mind, cold and intricate as a spider's web. The art world was built on reputation, on authenticity, on the story behind the art. Alina decided she would not just expose the affair. She would turn Chloe's own world against her. She would make the stage for Chloe's greatest triumph, the upcoming Spring Gala at her own gallery, the scene of her utter annihilation. And she would do it in a way that would leave no doubt as to who held the power. For the next 3 weeks, Alina played the part of her life. She was the serene, glowing mother-to-be. She discussed nursery colors with Everick, allowed him to rest his hand on her stomach, to feel the baby kick, and smiled lovingly at him over dinners at Daniel and Jean-Georges restaurants, where their presence was noted and photographed. She was weaving the final threads of their public image into a tapestry of domestic bliss, knowing she was about to set the entire thing on fire. Instead, she was a general preparing for battle. Her first move was to secure her flank. She scheduled a discreet lunch with her oldest friend, Beatrice Shaw, a partner at a top-tier divorce law firm. They met at a quiet corner table at La Grenouille, a place so steeped in old-world decorum that no one would dare eavesdrop. "You look radiant, Elle," Beatrice said, her sharp lawyer's eyes missing nothing. "But tired." Alina didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Everick is having an affair." She said it calmly, the words tasting like poison. Beatrice didn't gasp or offer platitudes. She simply nodded, her expression hardening. "Okay," she said. "Tell me everything." Alina laid it all out. The perfume, the hotel receipt, the Amex statements, the CJ art advisory, the photograph from the gala, the Instagram post. She presented her evidence with the dispassionate clarity of a prosecutor. Beatrice listened intently, her fork pausing over her Dover sole. When Alina finished, she took a slow sip of water. "The evidence is compelling but circumstantial. His lawyer, and it will be a shark from a firm like mine, will call it a series of unfortunate coincidences. They'll say you're a hormonal, paranoid, pregnant woman." "I know," Alina said, "which is why a quiet confrontation is out of the question. I need something irrefutable, something public." "What are you planning, Alina?" Beatrice asked, a note of concern in her voice. "Don't do anything that could jeopardize your position. The Winscott prenup is notoriously tough." "I read it again last night," Alina replied, her voice steely. "The infidelity clause is specific. It requires indisputable proof of intimate relations. A photograph, a confession. Anything less, and I walk away with a fraction of what I'm entitled to, what our son is entitled to." "So you need to trap him," Beatrice stated. "Not just him," Alina corrected. "Her, Chloe Jensen. He's insulated by layers of wealth and power. She isn't. Her reputation is her only real currency." Alina then laid out her plan, the one that had been crystallizing in her mind for weeks. The annual Chelsea Contemporary Gala was being held at Chloe's gallery in 10 days. Everick and Alina were the chairs of the event, their names printed at the top of the invitation. It was the biggest night of Chloe's professional life. Beatrice's eyes widened as she listened. "That's not just a confrontation, Alina. That's a public execution. She built her career on my husband's money and my broken trust," Alina said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'm simply collecting the debt." "You'll need more than the Cartier bracelet," Beatrice warned. "He could say he bought it as a gift for a client." "I know," Alina said. "I need something more personal, something unique, and I think I know how to get it." That evening, Everick came home with a gift. It was a large, flat box from Cartier. "For the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world," he said, kissing her. Her heart turned to ice, but she smiled. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace. "Everick, it's extravagant." "Nothing's too extravagant for you," he said, fastening it around her neck. As he did, she feigned a casual curiosity. "You know, darling," she began, her tone light, "I was thinking about that little art curator, Chloe Jensen, the one from the benefit. She's so ambitious. We should really do something to support her gallery. Perhaps acquire a piece for the new baby's nursery." Everick stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I don't know, Elle. Abernathy is already complaining about my spending on art." "Nonsense," Alina said, turning to face him, her hand on his chest. "We're the chairs of her gala. It would be a wonderful gesture. In fact, I was thinking of something special. You know that emerging artist she represents, a sculptor named Antoine Dubois. He does those beautiful minimalist bronze birds, a fledgling for our little fledgling. It's poetic." She was watching his face carefully, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew the artist. Of course he did. "Let me think about it," he said a little too quickly. "It's a busy week." But Alina had planted the seed. Over the next few days, she nurtured it, mentioning the sculptor again, leaving the artist's catalogue on the coffee table. She was baiting a trap, using her knowledge of Everick's desire to please her, or at least to appear to please her, as the lure. 4 days before the gala, her bait was taken. A courier from the Chloe Jensen Gallery delivered a purchase agreement to the penthouse. It was for a unique bronze sculpture by Antoine Dubois, the fledgling's first flight. The price was a staggering $75,000. It was a ridiculously expensive piece for a nursery, a clear attempt by Everick to appease both his wife and his mistress with a single grand gesture. But Alina's focus was on the document itself. The purchase was made by Winscott Innovations, but the signatory at the bottom, approving the acquisition on behalf of the gallery, was Chloe Jensen. And scribbled in the margin in Everick's unmistakable handwriting was a short note, "Chloe. Thanks for making this happen. A beautiful piece for a beautiful new beginning. J." He must have reviewed and signed it at her gallery. The note was meant for Chloe, a private message hidden on a business document he assumed Alina would never see. It was careless. It was arrogant. And it was exactly the proof she needed. A beautiful new beginning. The words echoed in her mind with venomous irony. He wasn't talking about their baby. He was talking about his new life, a life with Chloe funded by his marital assets. This note, combined with the other evidence, transformed a circumstantial case into a damning indictment. Alina carefully photographed the document with her phone. Then she placed the original in a fireproof safe alongside her passport and the baby's birth plan. The final piece of her plan involved her appearance. She called her personal stylist, a flamboyant man named Stefan. "Stefan, darling," she said, "the Chelsea Gala. I need a dress, but not one of my usuals. I don't want to look like a wife. I want to look like a widow. A very rich, very powerful widow." Stefan, intrigued, was silent for a moment. "I have the perfect thing," he said finally. "Valentino. It's black, severe, and utterly magnificent. It will make you look untouchable." "Perfect," Alina said. "Untouchable is exactly what I'm going for." The day of the gala arrived. As she had her hair and makeup done, a sense of calm settled over her. Everick was in his study, taking calls, oblivious. He thought this night was about celebrating art. He had no idea it was about to become his personal judgment day. As they rode down in the elevator, Everick looked at her. truly. Looked at her for the first time in weeks. The black Valentino gown was a masterpiece of stark elegance, clinging to her bump in a way that was both maternal and formidable. The Cartier diamond necklace he'd just given her was a cold fire at her throat. "Wow, Elle," he said, genuinely impressed. "You look breathtaking, absolutely lethal." Alina met his gaze in the mirrored elevator walls, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "I'm so glad you think so, darling," she said. "You have no idea." The Chloe Jensen Gallery in Chelsea was electric. The air buzzed with the chatter of art collectors, critics, socialites, and hangers-on, all bathed in the soft glow of expertly placed track lighting. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and canapés. The space, usually a quiet white box for contemplation, had been transformed into a theater of social ambition. And tonight, Chloe Jensen was its star. She stood near the entrance, radiant in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her slender frame. She was the picture of success, greeting guests with a dazzling smile, her voice confident as she discussed the art on her walls. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the sparkle of a familiar gold bracelet on her wrist, the Cartier love bracelet. When Everick and Alina Winscott arrived, a hush fell over the room, followed by a wave of sycophantic greetings. They were the main event, the patrons, the king and queen of this glittering affair. "Chloe, you've done a magnificent job," Everick said, beaming, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back for a fraction of a second too long. "The gallery looks incredible." "Everick, Alina, thank you so much for coming, and for everything," Chloe said, her eyes flicking to Alina's baby bump. "Alina, you look absolutely stunning. Motherhood suits you." The compliment was delivered with flawless sincerity, but Alina could see the flicker of triumph in her eyes, the look of a woman who believed she had won. "Thank you, Chloe," Alina replied, her voice placid, betraying none of the tempest raging within her. "It's a special night. I have a feeling it's one we'll all remember for a very long time." She let her eyes drift meaningfully down to the Cartier bracelet on Chloe's wrist before meeting her gaze again. For the first time, Chloe's smile faltered just for a moment. Alina allowed Everick to guide her through the crowd. She played her part with an Oscar-worthy performance, smiling, making small talk about the art, accepting congratulations on the baby. She spoke with the art critic from the New York Times, chatted with a hedge fund manager who was a major collector, and exchanged pleasantries with the wives of Everick's business partners. Every interaction was a strategic move, reinforcing her status, her grace, her position as the unassailable Mrs. Winscott. She saw Everick and Chloe speaking near a large brutalist sculpture. Their heads were close together. He laughed at something she said, and she touched his arm. It was a gesture of casual intimacy, but to Alina, it was a lit fuse. She saw Marcus Thorne, Everick's loyal right-hand man, watching them from across the room with a look of deep unease. He knew. Of course he knew. An hour into the event, the gallery director, a nervous man named Philip, tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The crowd quieted down. Philip launched into a speech about the importance of new artists and thanked the gallery's supporters. "And now," he concluded, "it is my great honor to introduce the chair of tonight's gala, a woman of impeccable taste and a true champion of the arts, Mrs. Alina Winscott." A polite round of applause filled the gallery. This was the moment. Everick, standing beside her, squeezed her hand. "You'll be great, honey." Alina walked to the small lectern set up in the center of the room. She adjusted the microphone, her eyes sweeping over the sea of expectant faces. She saw Chloe standing near the front, looking proud proprietary. She saw Everick watching her with a placid, supportive smile. She saw the society photographers, their lenses trained on her. She began, her voice calm and clear, resonating through the silent gallery. "Good evening," she said. "Thank you, Philip. It's an honor to be here tonight, surrounded by so much creativity and passion. When we look at the art on these walls, we are asked to consider its meaning, its story. We are asked to value its authenticity." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Authenticity. It's a quality we prize in art, isn't it? We want to know that what we are seeing is real, that the story it tells is a true one. A forgery, no matter how skillfully executed, is ultimately worthless. Its value is a lie. A few people nodded thoughtfully. Everick's smile remained fixed. Chloe looked on a picture of rapt attention. "Tonight," Alina continued, her voice gaining a harder edge, "I want to tell you a story about acquisition and value, a story about a very valuable collection that was compromised." The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The polite smiles on people's faces were replaced by looks of intense curiosity. This was not the standard bland speech of a wealthy patron's wife. "Imagine a collector," Alina said, her eyes never leaving Chloe's face. "A collector who spent years building a life's work, a partnership. It was a rare and beautiful collection built on trust, history, and shared dreams. But then a new piece was added, a piece that on the surface looked exquisite, young, ambitious, shiny." Everick's smile had now vanished. A look of confusion, then dawning horror, replaced it. He started to take a step forward, but Marcus Thorne, standing nearby, put a subtle hand on his arm, holding him back. "This new piece," Alina's voice dropped, becoming more intimate, more venomous, "was acquired through deceit. It was paid for with stolen funds. Not stolen from a bank, but stolen from the heart of the original collection. Stolen trust, stolen time, stolen promises." The crowd was utterly silent, captivated. People were exchanging nervous glances. They knew this was no longer a metaphor. "This new acquisition," Alina went on, "liked to display itself. It loved to be seen in all the best places, wearing beautiful things bought with someone else's resources. It wore, for instance, a very specific piece of jewelry, a symbol of love, ironically. A Cartier love bracelet, let's say. A gift that was a copy of a promise made to another." She flicked her eyes to Chloe's wrist. Chloe instinctively pulled her hand back, a flash of pure panic in her eyes. The crowd followed Alina's gaze. A collective silent gasp seemed to ripple through the room. "But a bracelet isn't enough, is it?" "It's circumstantial," Alina said, her voice dripping with scorn. "For true authenticity, you need provenance. You need documentation." She reached into the small, elegant clutch she was carrying. She pulled out her phone. With a few taps, she projected a high-resolution image onto the large white wall behind the lectern, the very wall that had moments before been displaying a looping video of the gallery's artists. On the wall, for everyone to see, was the photograph she had taken of the purchase agreement for the bronze sculpture. And there, magnified to an enormous size, was Everick's handwriting. "Chloe, thanks for making this happen. A beautiful piece for a beautiful new beginning. Jay." The silence in the gallery was shattered. It was absolute, profound, and devastating. Every eye was on the wall, then on Everick, whose face had gone ashen white, and then on Chloe, whose face was a mask of disbelief and terror. Alina let the image hang there for 10 long seconds. Then she turned her full attention to the woman who had tried to steal her life. "Chloe Jensen," Alina said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "As the curator of this gallery, a place you claim is dedicated to truth and beauty. I have one question for you. This beautiful new beginning my husband wrote about, does it feel beautiful now? Does it feel authentic?" She paused, her final blow delivered with the precision of a surgeon. "And that very expensive sculpture, the fledgling's first flight, paid for by my family's assets to be a gift for my son, where did you plan to display it?" The silence that followed Alina's final question was not empty. It was a physical presence, a dense, heavy blanket that smothered all sound and movement in the gallery. The low hum of the ventilation system, previously unnoticed, now roared in the stillness. The clink of an ice cube in a forgotten glass sounded like a gunshot. For a full agonizing 10 seconds, the entire New York art scene held its collective breath. Every eye was locked on the tableau of ruin, the damning words projected on the wall. The ashen face of the billionaire and the woman at the center of the storm, Chloe Jensen. Chloe stood as if she had been turned to stone, the silver of her gown seeming to lose its luster under the harsh glare of the projector. The confident smile she had worn all night was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure terror. In her mind, a frantic, screaming denial was trying to form, but no sound would come out. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her eyes that had admired her, envied her, desired her just minutes ago, now dissecting her with the cold curiosity of a lynch mob. The first sound to break the spell was a small, choked gasp from Chloe's own throat. Her mind, finally catching up to the reality of her public execution, began to scramble for a defense. "No," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that barely carried past the first row of spectators. It's a misunderstanding. It's not what it looks like." The denial was so feeble, so utterly inadequate in the face of the colossal evidence on the wall, that it was met with a new sound, a low, vicious murmur that rippled through the crowd. It was the sound of judgment being passed. People who had been air-kissing her cheek an hour before were now whispering her name with contempt, their expressions a cocktail of morbid glee and feigned pity. She could hear snippets sharp as shards of glass. The audacity! Right in front of his pregnant wife. Her career is over. Everick, who had been paralyzed by a tidal wave of shock and adrenaline, finally broke free. His image, his control, his entire world was slipping away. He stumbled forward, his movements clumsy, his face slick with sweat. "Alina," he croaked, his voice thick with a desperation she had never heard before. He reached a hand toward her, an instinctive gesture to stop the bleeding. "Stop this. Please, we can talk about this at home." Alina turned her head slowly, regarding her husband, not with the pain of a betrayed wife, but with the detached clinical appraisal of a scientist studying a specimen under a microscope. Her gaze swept over him from his expensive disheveled suit to his panicked eyes, and in that one look, she dismissed him entirely. "Home." She repeated the single word, dripping with a contempt so profound it made several people flinch. "Are you referring to the penthouse at 15 Central Park West? The one whose purchase was finalized with funds from my family's trust? The home where I am currently preparing a nursery for my son?" She took a deliberate step back from his outstretched hand. "That home is no longer yours, Everick. You forfeited your right to call it that. You are no longer welcome in it." She turned her back on him completely, a gesture of absolute finality. It was as if he had ceased to exist. She faced the stunned crowd again, her posture radiating an untouchable, almost regal authority. "My sincerest apologies for this interruption to the evening's festivities," she announced, her voice ringing with clarity and control. "Please consider my family's 7-figure donation to this gallery and any other financial arrangements with its curator officially and immediately rescinded." She paused, letting the financial blow land. "I do hope you all enjoy the rest of the champagne. I imagine some of you," her eyes flickered one last time to Chloe, "might find you suddenly have a great need for it." With that final devastating pronouncement, Alina turned and walked away from the lectern. She didn't flee. She made a calculated, graceful exit. The sea of guests parted for her, their awe and fear palpable. Men and women who commanded boardrooms and ran hedge funds shrank back, unwilling to meet the gaze of this woman who had just demonstrated such a terrifying capacity for strategic destruction. It was the sight of Alina's retreating back, poised, powerful, victorious, that finally shattered the last vestiges of Chloe's control. The spell was broken, and raw, primal hysteria erupted in its place. "He told me it was over." The shriek tore from Chloe's throat, raw and ragged, stripped of all its practiced sophistication. All heads swiveled back to her. "He lied to me. He said you were living separate lives. He said the marriage was a business arrangement. Nothing more." She whirled on Everick, her finger pointing, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and agony. "You told me you loved me. You told me we had a future, a beautiful new beginning. You wrote, you coward, you liar." The photographers, who had been frozen in a state of professional disbelief, suddenly erupted into a frenzy. The sound of their shutters was a percussive, predatory clicking. The flashes, a series of strobing explosions that illuminated Chloe's tear-streaked face and Everick's pathetic, trapped expression. They were capturing her complete and utter annihilation for the morning editions. Overwhelmed, humiliated, and utterly alone, Chloe's body gave out. With a gut-wrenching wail, she sank to her knees, the sound of her kneecaps hitting the polished concrete floor, audible in the sudden quiet. Her shimmering silver gown, a symbol of her supposed triumph, pooled around her like a shroud. The breakdown was absolute. She covered her face with her hands, her body convulsing with ugly, gasping sobs that echoed in the cathedral-like space of her ruined gallery. Outside, Alina stepped into the cool, clean air of the Chelsea night. The frantic sounds from within Chloe's hysterics. Everick's pathetic attempts at damage control, the machine gun fire of the cameras, were muffled as the heavy glass door swung shut behind her. A black Lincoln town car, summoned by Beatrice a half-hour earlier in a perfectly timed maneuver, pulled silently to the curb. The driver held the door. Before she got in, Alina paused. She reached up and unclasped the heavy Cartier diamond necklace Everick had given her as a pathetic, preemptive apology. It felt cold and heavy in her palm. It was a lie, made tangible, a bribe for her silence. She looked at the glittering, flawless stones, and then at a grime-streaked public trash can chained to a lamp-post a few feet away. With a calm, deliberate motion, she let the necklace slide from her hand. It fell into the darkness of the bin, with a soft final clatter against a discarded bottle. A fortune in diamonds discarded like trash. It was her last act of severance, a quiet ritual of purification. As the car pulled smoothly into traffic, Alina leaned her head back against the cool leather. She didn't feel the thrill of victory or the satisfaction of revenge. She felt a profound and desolate clarity. The feeling of a surgeon after a long and brutal but necessary operation. The cancer had been excised, the wound was deep and the recovery would be long. But she had done it. She had taken back her life, her story, her name. The rebuilding could now begin. The morning after the gala, New York City awoke to a feast of scandal. It was a story perfectly engineered for the digital age, wealth, sex, betrayal, and a very public immolation. The image of Chloe Jensen on her knees, a portrait of utter devastation, was the lead photo on every news site. The New York Post, in its typical gleeful savagery, ran the picture full page under the headline, "Billionaires Bust Up." The Times was more reserved, framing it as a shake-up in the city's philanthropic circles. But the implication was just as damning. On social media, the hashtag #Galagore trended for 36 straight hours. Alina experienced the explosion not as a participant, but as a distant, dispassionate observer. She was already gone. By dawn, she was at her family's ancestral estate in Southampton, a sprawling, shingle-style mansion buffered from the world by acres of windswept dunes and ancient oak trees. Here the only sounds were the cry of gulls and the rhythmic crash of the Atlantic. Her mother, a woman of quiet fortitude and iron will, managed the flow of information. She answered the calls, deflected the press, and brought Alina tea and broth, speaking only of the baby. Alina didn't look at the news. She didn't need to. She had authored the story. She knew how it would read. There was no triumph in her, only a vast, cold emptiness where her marriage used to be. The rage that had fueled her for weeks had burned out, leaving behind the hard, clean clarity of ash. She walked the private beach, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the kicks of her son. The only truth that mattered. She had raised her life to the ground to protect him, to give him a foundation that wasn't built on lies. This quiet shore was the beginning of that foundation. For Everick, there was no such sanctuary. He woke up alone in the cavernous penthouse, the silence amplifying the frantic ringing of his phone. He stumbled out of bed, his head pounding the events of the night before, replaying in a sickening loop of shame and disbelief. A glance at his tablet confirmed his worst fears. His face, pale and horrified, was next to Chloe's weeping one. He was a meme, a punchline, a villain in a drama he could no longer control. His first dozen calls to Alina went straight to a disconnected number. His texts vanished into a digital void. He then called her mother, a woman he had always found intimidating. The conversation was brief. "She doesn't wish to speak with you, Everick," Mrs. Astor said, her voice like chipping ice. "All future communication will be handled by her counsel." The line went dead. Panic gave way to a desperate, clawing rage. How could she do this? To him. To them. He paced the marble floors of the home she had already spiritually abandoned, his world shrinking with every headline, every missed call. For Chloe Jensen, the fallout was not a distant storm, but a direct hit. The paparazzi were a permanent fixture outside her Soho apartment building. Her phone was a torrent of abuse and professional ruin. The first email, which arrived at 7:01 a.m., was from her gallery's primary investor, a man who had praised her vision just a week earlier. The message was terse, citing a moral turpitude clause in their contract, and immediately withdrawing all funding. Then came the artists one by one, their representatives sending polite but firm notices, severing their ties. Her landlord for the gallery space issued a notice of default on her lease. Within 48 hours, the Chloe Jensen Gallery, her entire identity, existed only as a ghost on an abandoned website. She was a pariah, radioactive. A week later, Everick was summoned to an emergency board meeting at the Winscott Innovations Tower. He walked into the 50th floor boardroom, a place where he was usually met with deference and awe, to find a dozen stone-faced board members waiting for him. There was no anger in their eyes, which was worse. There was only cold financial calculation. "The stock is down 12%, Everick," said the chairman, a grim elder statesman of finance. "The markets don't care about your personal life. They care about stability and judgment. You have shown a catastrophic lack of both." He wasn't fired. That would be too messy an admission of defeat. Instead, he was strongly advised to take an indefinite leave of absence to focus on his family. It was a public neutering. He was stripped of his operational control, his parking space, his access card. As he left the building, he saw employees whispering, averting their eyes. He had become a ghost in his own empire. The legal battle that followed was brief and brutal. Everick hired Silas Lynch, a lawyer known for his scorched earth tactics. Lynch's first letter to Alina's counsel was full of bluster, threatening to paint her as emotionally unstable and vindictive. Beatrice Shaw's reply arrived by courier the next day. It was elegantly simple. It contained a formal petition for divorce, citing the prenuptials infidelity clause. Attached to it was a single glossy printout of the New York Post cover. At the bottom, Beatrice had written in black ink, Exhibit A. Lynch, undeterred, fired back that a tabloid photo was not indisputable proof. Beatrice's final response was even shorter. A single-sentence email sent to Lynch's personal address. "We look forward to deposing Miss Jensen under oath." That was the kill shot. The prospect of Chloe Jensen on a witness stand forced to recount every detail of the affair for public record. The hotel rooms, the art advisory payments, the gifts, the promises would create a second, even more damaging media firestorm. It would be a circus from which Everick's reputation and the company's stock price might never recover. Silas Lynch called Everick. "It's over," he said, all the fight gone from his voice. "Give her whatever she wants." 2 months after the gala, as the city's heat gave way to the crispness of early autumn, Alina gave birth in a private wing of a Southampton hospital. She held her son, a tiny, perfect creature with a fuzz of dark hair, and felt the last of the cold ash within her wash away. She named him Theodore Astor. Theodore, gift of God, and Astor, her name, her family, her strength. He would carry a legacy of resilience, not scandal. The divorce was settled with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Alina's demands were non-negotiable. She received the penthouse at 15 Central Park West, a tactical acquisition she intended to sell, cleansing herself of its memories. More importantly, she took a significant non-voting share of Winscott Innovations. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power. It tethered her to the company, permanently ensuring that for the rest of his life, a portion of Everick's success would flow directly to the family he abandoned. It was a constant, galling reminder of his loss, etched into his corporate filings. Everick was left a man hollowed out. He was still a billionaire, but he was diminished, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. He eventually returned to his role as CEO, but the magic was gone. He was cautious, scrutinized, haunted. His visitation rites with Theodore were a bi-weekly exercise in sterile formality, supervised by a nanny in the grand living room of a home that felt alien to him. He would hold his son, this small stranger who carried his features but not his name, and feel the profound, unbridgeable chasm he had created. Alina conversely remade herself. A year after the birth, she sold the penthouse for a record-breaking sum and bought a magnificent sun-drenched brownstone on the Upper East Side. She re-emerged into public life not as a Winscott, but as Alina Astor, a formidable power in her own right. She established the Astor Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting single mothers and funding female artists who lacked institutional support. It was her final, perfect act of defiance, transforming the very tools of her betrayal into instruments of empowerment for other women. She was photographed at benefits, poised and radiant sometimes, with Theodore on her hip. She never spoke of the scandal. She never had to. In the ruins of her marriage, Alina had built an empire of her own, one founded not on polished surfaces and deceit, but on unshakable authentic strength. She had taken a story of humiliation and rewritten it as an epic of survival. And so the curtain falls on the Winscott, a story of love, lies, and the ultimate public revenge. Alina Winscott proved that a woman's pain can be forged into a weapon, and that a reputation once shattered can never truly be repaired. She didn't just win a divorce, she won the war, for her own narrative emerging not as a victim, but as an icon of strength. But what do you think? Was Alina's public takedown a brilliant act of empowerment or a cruel spectacle that went too far? Was Chloe a willing homewrecker or another victim of Everick's manipulation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of real-life drama, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most compelling dramatic stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.